Hey Tim, we haven't talked about you being a dowser, mate.
Have you picked up a bent coat hanger?
I just might. I was expecting us to have that conversation.
Well, I'm talking to you about what you do.
I prefer to stay in my homeland and make small personal films that connect with people on a deep emotional level. If you can go through the day and be a kind person, then I think you can go to bed that night thinking you've had a good day. With my film, The Way My Way, this is a man that goes from hubris to humility.
Did you really start out at the start of that walk with?
Tim, you got to understand, I was a
The Camino movie? Tell me about that.
nearing completion. We're only probably about a week off locking off the picture cut. So the way it goes is that you complete the picture cut. People think that editing is purely the picture, but in fact, sound post production is even more complicated and more time consuming.
Do you enjoy the post-production process?
I love it, Tim. I read somewhere, some very famous director once said, there are only two times when, as a director, you really own the movie. One is at the writing stage, and the other is at the editing stage. And every other stage of production of a movie, you have to share it with people. And so at the moment, it's all mine. you know, it's all mine. I just love it. But also, every single decision that you make as a director, both in the pre-production and in the shooting, comes down to the editing. You have to always keep an eye cocked on how it's going to cut together. What shots do you need? How should the shots be constructed? The angles, the lighting, all of these things. And if you've done your job right, then coming into the editing room is an absolute pure joy. If circumstances haven't gone your way, then it can be hellish.
Yeah, I mean, even from my limited experience of very very different sort of production, um, it's obvious that any movie is made in the edit. One of the things that really surprised me some years ago when I was properly involved in production there, as I say, on a different level to you, was how some of the really good directors, I think I was reading about Woody Allen, for example, at that stage. So this would have been the like 90s, how much additional shooting they did once they'd put a picture cut together, went back, did the shots that they needed to make that edit. Really surprised me. Do you find yourself ever having to do that sort of thing?
Um, Not really, because in independent production, and I guess Woody Allen to an extent is independent production, but with the kind of budgets that we work on, um, it doesn't really allow us that. Um, that luxury. But the other thing too, Tim, I got to say is this: there have been occasions when I've done bigger budgets, bigger studio films, and things like that, where they've asked that, and it's so hard to go back and recreate something and get the same tone, get the same energy. You can go back and you can pick up some shots, but it's just never the same. Um, and so I've always avoided doing that, I got to say.
What would you classify as being the biggest film that you made? Because when you were working in Hollywood, I guess you were doing some interesting stuff over there.
Well, when you work in Hollywood to an extent, and obviously this depends upon your status, a director is a cog in a machine that, and that machine is designed to make money. And you can be a very, very fine director, but if your films don't make money, then you very quickly find yourself out of a job. I did a Warner Brothers movie with Sandra Bullock, a romantic comedy called Two If by Sea, co-starring Dennis Leary, and it was torturous. It was absolutely torturous. I had this huge amount of money. My initial producers, in fact, were Don Simpson and Jerry Bruckheimer. They're the ones that hired me and brought me on. And then the film went to turn around, they dropped out. But and the reason that I took the film on in the first place was because they were the producers, and they were the two hottest producers in the world at that point. And I worked with Don and Jerry for about 6 months, and I learned a huge amount, and I was in awe of their level of professionalism. It was extraordinary, particularly Jerry.
Right.
And Don Simpson, he's been gone now for quite some time, but I had some lengthy conversations with him, and the man was a genius. I mean, he was an erratic, crazy man, but he was an absolute genius. But anyway, that's by the by. I prefer to stay in my homeland and make small personal films that connect with people on a deep emotional level. I'm not interested in doing big budget Hollywood movies. I'm just not interested.
It was really intuition, that moment where you decided that you were going to make the intuition movie in the way that you did, that really pulled you across from the Hollywood picture, was it?
What happened was this. I was in post-production on this Sandra Bullock movie, and I had one of the top agents in Hollywood as a director's agent, and he was sending me a lot of scripts. And we had a house in the Hollywood Hills. My wife was with me, and we had 3 small children. We had a nanny, and we had limos take us everywhere and the whole deal. We had this beautiful, beautiful, beautiful house up above Sunset Plaza, looking down onto Hollywood. It was glorious. We had a swimming pool, the whole thing. And I was in bed one morning reading scripts, and my wife and I were sort of looking at schools for the children, and things like this. They joined the Beverly Hills Library, and we're going down and pulling out old movies and looking at them and stuff like that. And suddenly this thing hit me. I remember sitting up in bed reading the script. I turned to my wife and I said, I want my children, when they're older, to know the names of the Australian cricket team. I don't want them to know the names of the LA Dodgers. I said, we've got to leave here. We've got to go back to Australia. And that was it, because what I believed at the time, and I believe even more strongly now, is that as parents, if you want your children to grow up to have any sort of cultural viewpoint, then that cultural viewpoint has to be from their homeland. I don't want them to grow up, having sort of a hybrid cultural identity. Their place in the world is so terribly important. And so for that reason, at the end of that film, we packed up and we went home, even though I had the prospect of a career as a Hollywood director.
But that career, as you've already indicated, could well have been one. Yes, you would have had recognition as being Bill Bennett, good film director, good Hollywood film director. You'd had all of that stuff in your life. But equally, as you've described, the frustration of the mechanism to actually allow you to be your creative self would have been a massive burden, surely, wouldn't it? I mean, it would have been very not you.
Um, Tim, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now had I followed that path. And I'm so happy doing what I'm doing. And I feel like I'm doing something worthwhile. I'm getting a huge amount out of it personally. I'm working closely with Jennifer, my wife. We've now been married 41 years. Um, I do not regret the decision at all.
In the movie The Way My Way, the Camino story, do you know what I keep mispronouncing. It's Camino, isn't it? I keep wanting to say Cimino, as in Michael Cimino, the film director.
He made a film called Heaven's Gate, which brought down a studio.
Yes. That's an example of ego at play, I suspect, where
and hubris as well.
you'll have to. Hubris. What does that mean exactly?
Hubris, basically, oh, crikey, it means self-aggrandizement. It's sort of another step on ego, in a sense of ego being used in that way.
Right.
Hubris is with my film, The Way My Way. When I was trying to find a shorthand to tell actors and heads of department what the film is about, I said this is a man that goes from hubris to humility. That's how I describe it. And hubris meaning the self-assured blah 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 blah. Excessive pride. The difference between arrogance and hubris, the two are closely related and are synonyms of the other. Arrogance tends to be one excessive pride relating to how they are better than others, whereas hubris is extremely self-belief in one's ability and may have nothing to do with others at all.
Okay.
You don't want to be a person with hubris, but we all have been.
But given that this is I mean, I haven't read the book. I probably will, but in fact, I will. But if your elevator pitch was that it's a story going from hubris to humility, surely you didn't feel that. Did you really start out at the start of that walk with the kind of level of hubris that did you feel as though you really had that as part of your being at the start?
Oh, Tim, you got to understand, I was a dick. I was a serious dick. To give you an example, we travel a lot, right? And we travel overseas a lot in the course of work. I would oftentimes we take the family, so I'd book into a hotel, a nice hotel, and I would ask for a room, and then and oftentimes after a long flight from Australia, traveling 20 hours or so, with three children and my wife, and I'd go to the room, and I wouldn't like the room for some reason or other. It was too noisy, or I didn't like the layout of it, or the bathroom was too small or something like that. So I go downstairs and I'd say, I'd like another room, please. And so they would give me another room, and I go to that room and I wouldn't like that one either. So oftentimes I'd go through 3 or 4 rooms before I found one that I was really happy with. And this is after coming off like a 24-hour flight from Australia. So if you can imagine, my wife and my children are not at all happy. So what would happen was this. We would check into a hotel, and my wife and the kids would go to the coffee shop, and they'd say, we're going to wait here until you find a room that you're happy with. And when you got the room you're happy with, come and tell us, and we'll join you. That's what I was like.
Oh, dear God.
Some might say that I was, particular. some might say that I was selfish and uncaring of my family, but that's what I did. And then I walked the Camino, and I had to stay in what's called albergues, which are dormitory style accommodation, which you share with, dozens of other people. And I couldn't do that. I couldn't say, no, I'm not going to have this bunk. I want that
Yeah,
bunk over there because, it's
yeah,
it's near the window.
yeah.
And so the Camino was a huge wake up call for me in a good way. You were grateful if you got a bed at all.
And how long did you spend walking it?
The Camino is 800 kilometers or a bit more. I spent 31 days. I had trouble with my knee. I had rest day for 2 days. So my walking days, in fact, were 29.
And what year was it that you did it?
10 years ago,
So-
2013.
right.
I
Wow.
worked I worked out that I averaged for my walking days, I averaged 30 kilometers a day.
Which is pretty good
Everything on
going.
everything on my back.
Yeah. Yeah. That's pretty good going. Yeah, you must have been pretty fit to make a start on that.
I did a lot of training beforehand, and in fact, I did so much training that I buggered up my knee. I had an old knee injury which flared up. So by the time I got to Spain to start the walk, I could barely walk.
Right. Right.
And here's the really interesting thing, Tim. And this is what the book is about, and really what the film is about as well. Um, I was in pain for all of that walk. I was in enormous pain. I found out later I had no cartilage in my knee joint. I was walking bone on bone.
Wow.
I did it through a mixture of painkillers and Coke Zero. And but the thing is that I'd done so much training. I got myself to such a level of fitness. And I'm such an obsessive person, and so quantifiable in everything that I do, that I had my heartbeat down, I had my pace down, I knew the length of my stride, I knew exactly how much was on my pack and how that would impact on my pace and so forth. I had everything down. And I remember on a training session one time before I left, I thought, I can do this in probably 27, 28 days. I'm going to smash it out of the park. And then in the last week, I did a really intensive 35-kilometer hike. I did that 2 days in a row. And at the end of it, my knee was ratchet. And so what happened was I got to the Camino, and instead of, being this super fit, I'm going to do this in 27, 28 days. It was, can I make this? Can I actually finish this? And, but here's the really interesting thing. I would not have gone through the personal transformation I had I not that pain. That pain humbled me. It literally brought me to my knees. It's what stripped me of the hubris, the pain. And
Yeah.
if I hadn't had that pain, if I had done it in 27 or 28 days and smashed it out of the park, then the whole impact of the Camino would have been an athletic exercise and not a spiritual exercise. So in many ways, I was fortunate. I was fortunate to have the pain because the pain was like a crucible. It was this fire. This knee was a crucible. It was this fire, that was melting the old me and forging a new me.
It's a really good example of how our trials and rubbish and crap that we go through in life can really be turned around and used as the catalyst for change. That really is a good. So this movie is going to be released. When do you expect it to be released?
It should be released next year, where we'll be finished the film by Christmas. We're submitting it to some film festivals. I've had two films in official selection in Cannes in the past. It would be wonderful if the film got into Cannes. So we'll see, but it should be in release next year. Yeah.
Given that it's so much more like your old, like this traditional filmmaking structure, in as much as you are the director and you've got actors, you've got somebody playing you, you're kind of taking your work in this case back much closer to the standard Hollywood style of movie of telling a story, of storytelling. Do you expect that will pull you a little bit more towards that, given that the world is a different place to what it was, when you were working in Hollywood, and there would be more receptivity to a more interesting and enlightening type story anyway over that way?
Well, here's the thing. Everything you say is true, but one of the things that I did that's quite different with this film is that the pilgrims that I met along the way that were in part responsible for my personal transformation, they came back 10 years later to play themselves.
Brilliant.
So what I had was I added it up. Out of 24 roles in the film, only 4 are professional actors.
Oh, wonderful.
All the rest are pilgrims, and they're the real pilgrims that I met 10 years ago.
Great.
So, as a director, it was a very tricky exercise because, how do you get good performances out of real people? I think anybody who watches this film will be stunned at the quality of performance of these people. What happened, Tim, was that I stayed friends with them in the intervening years. Two fellows from Hungary who were. So what happened was this. I flew from Sydney to Biarritz. In Biarritz, I got a taxi. Now, I had been on a forum and I had organized to share the taxi with 3 other people. 2 were Hungarian blokes and 1 was a Dutch girl. In the taxi, there were the 4 of us. That taxi ride, which was something like 80 kilometers or so, and took a bit over an hour. In that taxi, we formed a friendship that has lasted to this very day and will be there for our lifetimes. It was extraordinary. Just from this hour and 20-minute taxi ride, we walked together and then we split up. And then we came together again at times throughout our walk. And on the last day, we all met in the square in front of the cathedral on the very last day. And so those people have remained dear friends. Jennifer and I have gone to Hungary and spent time with them, stayed in their house. Really important pilgrims that were from Bergamo in Italy. We've remained friends with them and stayed with them in Italy. So when I called them up last year and said, "Hey, I'm going to make a movie. Would you like to be in it?" They said, "Yeah."
That's fantastic.
So it is really quite different.
Yeah, I can see that. And just before, I'll just ask you a little bit about that directing tactic shortly. But what I wanted to say was, as you were describing that, it chokes me up, mate. That as you were describing that you met again on that last day outside that, I was nearly going. I mean, what's going on there? Why is that so powerful?
What happened was my knee got worse and worse, and I struggled into Pamplona, which is about 70 kilometers into the Camino, in 70 kilometers into an 800-kilometer walk. And I happened to meet up with these two Hungarian fellows and the Dutch girl later on as well. And they saw that I was in real pain, and they took me to this albergue that they were staying in. And one of these blokes got ice, and he got this really expensive high-tech towel, and he wrapped my knee in ice with this towel. And then he said to me, "You've got to stay off this for a week. You can't walk. You've got to ice the knee, and keep the towel so that you can use it to ice the knee." And the next day they said, "See you later," and they left. And they never ever thought that I would see them, that they would see me again. They thought that my Camino was over. Well, I stayed there one day. I didn't stay there 3 days or a week. And I went to myself, I'm going to catch these guys and I'm going to give them back the towel. And that's really what the film is about and what my walk was about. I was determined to repay that generosity and that kindness by showing them that I could complete the Camino.
Wow. I'm so looking forward to seeing this film. We get all sorts of people watching these videos, some of whom are, associated in the industry. They're performers or they're, whatever. I'm interested in just a quick side shoot, really, question on how did you do that? How did you find the way to work with those amateurs? Because, did you just do it as ad lib? How did that work for you as a director?
It's a really good question, and it actually begs a very complex answer because it's not easy. It helps that I started off as a documentary director. When I wanted to move from documentary to drama, I took myself out for 3 years and I learned acting.
Okay.
I went to acting school, which is what a lot of people who want to transfer from documentary to drama don't do. I went to acting school, and that's where I met my wife, who was an actress. So I've grown up with an actress. And I came out of that 3-year acting school knowing two things. One, I never want to be an actor. Never. And two, I had enormous respect for actors and what they have to go through. So when I made the decision to go with the actuals, and I called them the actuals rather than amateurs or whatever. When I decided that I would go with the actuals, I gave a lot of thought as to how I would actually do this and how I get a performance from them. And I came up with a process that ended up working really well. And in very simple terms, that process was take the film out of it. From the very first phone call, I didn't use film jargon. I didn't use film speak. It was like, hey, let's go back and do this again. Right. I kept it very low key. I kept it relaxed. When we came to production, we had, quite a big team. I told all the crew before the actuals actually arrived that they were not to use film jargon. They must not speak to them. And in fact, most of the times, my wife, who produces with me, kept the crew away from them. They never received call sheets, which are the detailed sheets of what you're doing the next day. They never received. I didn't give them a script, even though all of their stuff was very carefully scripted. And when we came to shoot, I created an atmosphere on set that was really low key. We never slated before. We didn't put a slate in front of the head before we did a take, things like, just little things. I took the film process out of it. And what happened was that I got very real, very true performance. Yeah. I mean, it was tricky, it was very, very delicate.
So were you working with one camera or a couple of cameras or
Two cameras.
two cameras? And then if you'd script, as you said, you'd scripted dialogue beforehand, but were you trying to get them to be echoing that dialogue, or did you want to go with the essence of each of the scenes that you were
Um,
able?
there were a couple of scenes where it needed to be word perfect. There were a couple of most of the stuff though, I was more interested in the essence of what they were saying rather than it being word perfect. Um, so there's one character in the film. This is true. This pilgrim met me on the Meseta, as an American, very brash, um, very loud, and we started talking. He said, "What do you do?" And I said, I make films." And he says, "What, adult films?" And I went naively, "Yeah, I make films for adults." And he went, "Oh man, I come from the porn capital of the world. I come from the San Fernando Valley." I said, "No, no, I don't make porn." And he was absolutely convinced that I made porn. And I remember him saying, "Look, there's no shame in it." And I said, "I can assure you, I don't make porn. All you got to do is look at the car I drive. That will tell you I don't make porn." Um, and and he said, "What's the name of your production company?" "Well, my production company is called BJ Films, with Bill and Jennifer. Now, and Tim, you might find this hard to believe, but I had no idea what BJ Film means. BJ means in porn speak. I had absolutely no idea. And when I told him that my company was called BJ Films, he just broke down hysterically laughing. And he had a group of people up ahead that he was walking with, and he just yelled out, "Hey, I've just met the porn king from Australia's company's name's BJ Films." And I went, "Yeah, Bill and Jennifer. What are you talking about? Bill and Jennifer." Anyway, later on, I understood what it meant and I was very embarrassed. But he haunted me then across the Meseta. It's like every town I went into, this voice would boom out of a coffee shop bar somewhere. "There's BJ Films." Anyway, this one wonderful pilgrim played that part and did it really well.
Excellent, excellent. So was he an actor in the
He was an
film?
actor.
Ah,
Yeah.
amazing, amazing. Brilliant. Okay, so fantastic. It certainly. It sounds great. It sounds great. It really does. I really hope it gets into Cannes and that it does well for you. I'm sure it will. It's fantastic, and I'm sure your editor must be overjoyed with these performances as you're putting it together.
Yeah, look, I think it surprised a lot of people. I got to say the performances throughout are very, very strong. And but I would very rarely go beyond two takes.
Ah,
Uh,
wow.
it was if it required more than two takes, then something was fundamentally wrong.
Right. Yeah. Fantastic. Okay. Talking about creating your story. Fantastic. Brilliant. So should I be directing people to billbennett.com? Is that the best place to go to?
.com.au.
Yeah, okay.
Hey Tim, we haven't talked about you being a dowser, mate. I was expecting us to have that conversation.
Well, I'm talking to you about what you do. That's. Have you picked up a bent coat hanger?
Well, I just might, but I tell you what, I was fascinated to find out that you were very proficient at that.
Um, it's a subconscious process. So it's we believe it's done through, you know, subconscious muscular movements, and that's what makes the rod move. But the real conversation is happening in the same way as you described your conversation that you were having with, I tend to call them the management upstairs, about your book. Then you can have that conversation as you hold a dowsing rod, for example, and you'll get a yes response from holding that rod, or a no response from holding that rod. So
yeah, right beside you. But do you go with them everywhere?
They're right here on my desk because this is my job. so you know, yeah. So, but you know, I mean, that's yeah. I mean, I've as a dowser, you tend to start to well, I mean, I don't walk out of the house with them, you know. These little ones, I use them in the house healing work that I do, and I've got a pendulum here. I used to use that more, but I now stick with those little ones. But yeah, so I mean, the thing is that everybody can do this, and you know, you're sensitive enough to understand that all you have to do is to simply pick up, and as I say, bend a couple of bits of wire coat hanger, hold them out straight in front of you, and just ask a question, simple question like, am I standing up? So you know what the answer is. Am I standing up? Obviously, if you're sitting down, it's a no. And usually what will happen is the rods will move outwards as a no and inwards as a yes. It's not always the case, but that's usually the common response. You may not get a response straight away, or you may just get one that just gently kind of moves a little bit and just kind of indicates and stops. But if you keep practicing, it'll improve and the flow will improve. It's not magic. It's not, you know, it's in your terms, prosaic. Everybody can do it. It's just part of our natural ability. But what it does do is it means that we can link into that non-local aspect of self. And that is where all of that interesting mystical or metaphysical stuff can start to happen. And you know, we appear from that field of energy as these, you know, personified beings, but really that's us at that level, that non-local consciousness, and we just pop up for these periodic explorations of what's it like to be in the very rigid 3 dimensions in order to learn whatever we learn, you know. But yeah, so stuff.